said, I wanted to tell you a little bit today about our presentation that we have scheduled called Supportive Strategies for Behavior Changes in Children. So my name is Brandy Jensen. I'm with the Brain Injury Alliance of Iowa, and we're really excited about sharing this topic with you today. And so I wanted to take some time to introduce Dr. Lindgren. Dr. Scott Lindgren is a pediatric psychologist with the University of Iowa, Stead Family Children's Hospital, and Carver College of Medicine. And he holds his bachelor's degree from Yale University and his PhD in clinical psychology from the University of Iowa. And he completed his postdoc fellowship training at the Harvard Medical School in Boston, at Boston Children's Hospital. So currently, his clinical and teaching and research activities are focused on child neuropsychology, brain injury, and then autism spectrum disorders, also including an interest in disability and health and the prevention of disabilities. So he has published extensively in the areas of developmental disabilities, brain injury, learning disorders, ADHD, and neurobehavioral functioning associated with prematurity and chronic health conditions, which is very interesting. He's been an investigator on research funded by NIH, NIMH, HRSA, and the CDC. Currently, he's the principal investigator on an NIH grant studying how to reduce problem behavior in young children by training parents through telehealth, which has been a real up-and-coming option for folks. So Dr. Lindgren is an associate director for the program development for the university, the Iowa's University Center on Excellence on Disabilities, and is a psychology training director for Iowa's Leadership Education in Neurodevelopmental Disabilities, the LEND program. So he's also a collaborator with the Department of Public Health and their Traumatic Brain Injury and Disability Health Center, and is the co-director of the University of Iowa Children's Hospital Autism Center. So just as much as we can through technology, give a warm welcome to him. And just as a reminder that if you have questions throughout this that you want to just try to utilize that question or chat box in your control panel. So at this point, what I'm going to do is just turn the session over to him, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Thanks, Brandy, and I appreciate everyone who is hooking up to the webinar today. And I hope you'll find this interesting and useful. We're certainly very concerned about kids who've had brain injuries who develop significant behavior problems. And I'm going to talk about that throughout the talk today. We're going to allow, I hope, a few minutes for questions at the end. And so, as Brandy said, either save them for later or type them in, and we'll try to come back to those later. I'm also listing, as you can see on your screen, Valerie Kuhl has been involved in putting some of this presentation together, but she wasn't able to join us today. So let's see here. If we can get this moving, that is. There we go. Just acknowledge a few things. We have support for this presentation from the State Implementation Partnership Program that is funded by the Administration for Community Living through the Iowa Department of Public Health, and we have other partners, stakeholders who are involved in that, including the Brain Injury Alliance. And we have no other financial relationships to disclose. The objectives today are, I hope you'll be able to recognize some behaviors that are common after a brain injury and to understand how problem behaviors can arise from cognitive changes, physical impairments, and or emotional states in kids who've had a brain injury. I'm also hoping you'll learn to focus on setting up antecedent conditions, kind of the things that come before a behavior problem, so that promoting success by students in school and by kids in their homes and communities. And I'm going to be talking kind of a mix of individual issues that are focused on management of kids, and sometimes that's focused more on what teachers are seeing and other times more on parents. But really, I think the strategies we're going to be talking about apply to both kinds of settings. And then hopefully we can think about planning interventions for coping with behavior problems after brain injury. So certainly I want you to understand some of the issues that go into figuring out behavior problems in these kids, but I also want you to be able to actually do some things to help kids after a brain injury. So first, just a real quick look at how common a problem brain injury is in Iowa. On every day in Iowa, 6 people will have a brain injury that's serious enough to require hospitalization. And 2 of those 6 will be school-age kids, and 1 of those 6 will die from the injury. So this is something that affects Iowans every day. Our focus, though, today is going to be mainly on behavior after brain injury. And I just want to show you a couple of things that I think, kind of keep in the back of your mind as we're going forward here. These are some of the regions of the brain that are susceptible to damage in a traumatic brain injury. And I really want to focus on those top 2 bullets. The frontal lobe, which has a lot to do with executive functions, behavioral control, and output, including speech output. And then the temporal lobe on the side that deals a lot with memory and mood regulation and language, especially in the left hemisphere. Now, there are issues that come up in kids with serious brain injuries that involve the brainstem or the cerebellum or some of the other lobes, the occipital lobe for visual processing, or parietal lobe, midbrain, or white matter. I'm not going to focus as much on those because the frontal lobes and the temporal lobes are particularly susceptible, just the way sometimes the brain bounces around inside the skull. And so the things we're going to be focusing on, we're going to talk a lot about executive functions because that's really a big part of the behavior problems we see frequently after brain injury, but also the problems with memory and learning and regulating mood that come up so commonly in brain injury. So those are some areas that are really susceptible to problems. This gives you a sense. This is just estimated over several different studies. If you have a severe TBI, the significance of a problem behavior is pretty great. I mean, more than 1/3 for sure, and up nearing 3/4 of kids with a severe TBI will show some pretty serious problem behavior. Milder behavior problems are common in all kids, whether they have brain injury or not. But these are sort of above and beyond what we would normally see in a typically developing kid. And even in mild TBI, about 1/3 have some kinds of problems. Fortunately, a lot of them do resolve quickly, but you can see some irritability that can continue up to a year or even more after a significant injury, and these are just in the milder injuries as well. You got to think about behavior over time in kids with brain injury because these are developing individuals, and this is something that Mark Ilvesacker, who has passed away a few years ago now, but really was very insightful about looking at kids' behavior and looking at the way that interacts with development. And this is a quote from Ilvesacker. In children injured in the early or middle childhood years, the persisting behavioral and psychosocial problems negatively influence quality of adult life far more than intellectual or physical problems. This is something that we hear a lot from teachers. We hear a lot from youth with injuries who are struggling to fit into the workforce and deal with the demands of working and the demands of social interactions as they move into adulthood. That problems with behavior and mood are much more common as a limiting factor on quality of adult life than simply having some problems with cognitive functioning or physical problems alone. Also, when we think of behavior over time in poorly in school, it obviously doesn't make them feel confident or happy. They can become more social isolated, and even the activity restrictions that are sometimes involved with more severe brain injuries can be really challenging for kids who are trying to be as involved socially as they can be. Those problems can arise from lots of different reasons. The physical state can matter. You can see a lot of fatigue, headaches, dizziness. These are common even in concussions that eventually resolve, and those can linger over a long period of time in some individuals too. We also see problems with the emotional state. So depression, anxiety, irritability, those things are very frequent problems in kids with brain injuries, and it complicates just dealing with their particular problems with behavior and mood in a straightforward way. There also is a very common effect on pre-injury characteristics leading to a worsening of problems after an injury. So you may have a child, for example, who may have had some problems with attention or impulse control before an injury, and then they have an injury, and now it's worse. It's kind of gone over the edge into being now in a significantly inappropriate range. And that can be true with mood as well. Somebody who was, a little tired, a little had a tendency to be depressed or maybe anxious frequently, now may be even more likely to show those particular problems after a brain injury. So pre-injury characteristics can become worse after an injury, and that's one of the problems we frequently see. There also may be responses of the environment to the child's learning needs or behavior that interact with this difficulty that a child after a brain injury may have in just negotiating the world. And that can create a lot of often increasing problems over time, even if the injury itself is mostly resolved, at least in a stable situation. So let's just look at executive functioning deficits first, and we'll also talk a little bit later about some issues in terms of trying to look at a functional behavioral analysis to figure out what the function may be for a particular child. But I just want to go through some of the things that we think of as executive functions, and they're a long list, longer than even this long list, that of things that we do, things that our brain does to kind of keep us working in the world, focusing in the world, and all those things that kind of go beyond just how smart you are and what kinds of physical skills you have. These are how the brain organizes what it does, and it really has checks and balances on success or failure in the real world. So we think about things like working memory, organization, sustaining attention, inhibition, task initiation, planning and setting goals, being flexible, self-monitoring and awareness of what's going on and how to adjust for that, and then overall self-regulation. And I just want to talk about a few of these and think about what you might do if you see a problem with that, some potential solutions for kids who have these problems. So just thinking first about working memory. And remember, we talked about some concerns about some of the parts of the brain that might be involved in working memory, might be particularly susceptible to brain injury. So the ability to hold information in your head while you're performing complex tasks. So that's what we usually mean by working memory. And there are lots of complicated paradigms that get used to assess this, but the thing that is required is to carry out. This is essential. Working memory is essential to carrying out multi-step activities and completing mental arithmetic, following instructions that are challenging. We all need that to get by every day in the real world, and it's kind of the part of the multitasking that life demands of us these days. It's also, there's a need to sustain performance and attention. You need to stick to an activity for an appropriate amount of time, and working memory can be part of that picture as well. And so how this may show up in the real world is you may have trouble remembering things, just like phone numbers, directions, even for a few seconds. You may lose track of what you're doing as you are trying to work on something, forgetting what a child is supposed to do when they enter the classroom, difficulties with staying organized, inability to retell a story because they really aren't keeping that in working memory long enough to be able to tell you what they heard. Those are some of the things you may observe. And if you're thinking about interventions, usually you come up with strategies that help record things so that somebody can remember them better, whether it's recording information, if it's verbal information that needs to be processed that way, repeating things, covering the same stuff several times so they kind of sink in. You can take notes, you can do things like that can really help. There are also visual strategies that can be helpful, especially for people who rely on visual processing to learn. And so you can have lists, you can have, putting things in places where they're easy to remember, like your backpack on the way out the door. You can use a lot of the apps that are now available on smartphones and iPads. Those kinds of things are really helpful. And visual cues with oral information can help any information that isn't sticking to maybe stick a little bit better in your mind. We talked about inhibition as another one of those executive functions that can be a challenge after brain injury. So that's the idea that you need to think before you act, and the need to delay or inhibit responses based on your ability to evaluate the situation and look at all the factors that go into it. And so when you're looking at what inhibition shows up as in the real world, you see things like impulsivity, blurting out stuff, interrupting. You can see a lot of behavior problems in unstructured situations where it's kind of dependent on the regulation of the child. So in recess or lunch or passing in the halls, those can be issues. Not following classroom rules, emotional outbursts, use of inappropriate words, physical aggression, lots of things where you just kind of lose control, don't exercise the appropriate control that more typically developing kids might do. So trying to focus on intervention through those kinds of things, there usually is a need to have more in the way of external controls, and we'll get into this as we continue talking today, because there are ways to deal with this that are really important, really critical for kids who've had an injury. But it may even involve restricting access to situations where the child can get into a lot of trouble because they're not appropriately structured. There's often a need to increase overall supervision from parents, from teachers. There may be aides even necessary at school if the problems are pretty significant. Excuse me. There's also, it's important to find ways to cue the child to control their impulses. So, as an example, before going out for recess, they may need to be reminded of certain behaviors that are appropriate or not appropriate in that setting. It's also usually useful to ignore disinhibited responses that really don't interfere too much with other activities and are more a matter of the child's problems with self-control than anything they're doing to consciously try to act out or get something. And it's also important to redirect and refocus kids who are getting kind of off in directions where their behavior is getting out of control. Another thing that, and I don't know that a lot of people recognize this always, but it can also be hard to just get started on certain tasks after you've had a brain injury. So the ability to begin a task without putting it off unduly, and so to get to it quickly. And you see this come out in a lot of different ways, but in kids in school, a student may have the knowledge but doesn't act on it unless they're prompted. They may show poor production of work or forget work a lot, may have done the work even, but not remember to turn it in. Things that sometimes look like noncompliance and get attributed to that, but really aren't from any attempt to manipulate the situation or avoid something by not complying. They're just not putting it all together well enough, and they can't kind of get things going on their own well enough to be able to initiate tasks. And so it can also look like inattention or laziness or just overall lack of motivation. And there isn't necessarily a lot of benefit from just simply practicing, because it's still hard to get started. And the student is often described as just a follower, not as a leader. And they may show very few spontaneous ideas expressed. Again, it's sort of getting started, getting it coming out that may be quite limited. So when you see that in kids, you know, it can be helpful to get little devices like mnemonic devices to remember something, so you can teach a rhyme, you know, when in doubt, look about. So in a classroom setting, it may help to realize what other kids are doing, so you can kind of imitate that behavior, since you couldn't figure out how to get started yourself. Using cues, either verbal cues or visual cues, to prompt a child to begin. So a picture taped to the desk, or a brief cue from a teacher, and you can even arrange ahead of time kind of a neutral cue that can be used, so it doesn't look like you're pestering the child if you're a teacher trying to increase initiation of tasks. Walking a child through the first part, sort of getting the momentum going in a positive direction that can get the kids started. Noting, you know, when the start and stop time are for the task, and creating some rewards to motivate the child to start appropriately and then end appropriately. And you can even use a kitchen timer another way, you know, on a smartphone or an app to do some timing to cue the child to start assignments and get them going on assignments if they need that kind of cueing. It's also really tough for some kids who've had a significant brain injury, again, especially if some of the executive functions are involved, to be able to think flexibly, and, you know, the ability to revise plans in the face of hurdles or setbacks, new information or mistakes. And kids show this by being more rigid, by having trouble with transitions or shifting to new tasks. They may perseverate a lot on going over and over on the same things, and they don't necessarily learn well from mistakes, because they aren't really feeding that information into their system to then adjust things as they move forward. And those can also appear to be non-compliant behaviors or defiance. And they may have problems of accepting change. So that's, again, not being able to adapt to new situations because they lack that flexibility. And some of the things you can do to try to deal with that rigidity is reduce the novelty of the task and put it into some kind of routine that has been built up, and then you don't require the new thinking about how to do this task. You can modify the task so the child gets comfortable with the changes and slowly shape those changes into classroom routines. You can help kids reframe the situation. You can label and identify the new challenges using words and concepts that the child already understands, so they don't treat it as something that is too different for them to process. And you can certainly and should increase the level of support that is offered around the task, including rewards or help, or just assisting with coping through the situation. And you can even develop specific transition plans if the child is really having a lot of problems with transitions to new activities. Another one that we think about a lot is self-monitoring and awareness, and that's sort of the ability to step back and take a bird's eye view of the situation and kind of ask themselves, hey, how am I doing with this? Is this working out? And when you see problems with this kind of self-monitoring, it often shows up in not benefiting from the natural feedback that's inherent in appreciating the actual outcome of an effort. They may be unaware of deficits that they have. They may it may look like they're just denying them or confronting someone about why they didn't do something when they really don't understand how to use that information to change their own behavior. So there's an unawareness of how to solve problems because they really don't know how to make that adjustment, and this relates to some of the inflexibility we were talking about a second ago. And making mistakes that could be avoided is often part of this picture, and unawareness of the impact of behaviors on others. So those are all part of that problem with self-monitoring and self-awareness. To try to get some changes in this, to build some skills in self-monitoring, you can embed questions designed to elicit metacognition, basically thinking about thinking, into the classroom routine. So teachers may ask the entire class, how did you solve that problem? Or can you think of another way of doing that? Just get them thinking about how they did the, sort of energize the strategies to handle that problem. You can also build error monitoring into the task requirements. So you have to show your work or, describe what you've done verbally to a teacher so they know you've really figured it out and thought it through. You can also give kids assignments that are forcing them to use their thinking about thinking skills. So they may need to grade themselves on an assignment and explain why. And there are other kinds of strategies and scripts, and there's some good websites like the Project LearnNet site, and I was just mentioning that as another place you can look for this kind of information. But knowing all those things that we were just describing, it's frequently puzzling for teachers and really parents too, to understand what's going on with a kid who's had a brain injury, because they often look so normal, especially if they haven't had major orthopedic injuries or severe speech problems showing up after the injury. And teachers may even be unaware of the impact of the injury because it's not visible. So it's really important for educators to make the connection between the brain injury and potential behavioral consequences. And I just think that that's something that often teachers and parents as well need to really think about carefully. Another reason brain injuries can be puzzling to teachers is a child who experiences a brain injury early in life may appear to be academically and behaviorally typical or normal for a number of years following the injury, but then may experience pretty marked difficulties when new demands emerge in middle school or in high school. And the thing that we often say about kids with brain injuries is they can be consistently inconsistent, which is really frustrating to teachers, and plays havoc if you're trying to put together an IEP for a student who can demonstrate a skill or behavior one day, but it's kind of gone the next day. And we do see that a lot in kids with brain injuries, where there's that fluctuation in performance from day to day. And then you really have to build in ways to make sure that you're giving the child the support they need in order for them to show what they do know, and not to just give up if they have a problem one day. They may be able to handle it on a better day. Now, this is something that several of my colleagues and I put together because these are all things that we've heard from various teachers and other school staff about why not do anything to manage a child's behavior after a TBI, because sometimes it can be easier to just kind of let things go. But here are the reasons that we've heard. We've got a top 10 list working our way up here. So this is common when it's a student who's new to the teacher. Let's just see how he does in my class before we try to do anything different. So it's basically let him fail first, and then we'll try to do something if we need to. Another one is I know she's had problems in the past, but I like to make my own decisions about how to teach a child. So basically, a teacher who doesn't trust the previous teachers and parents who've dealt with the child and kind of want to decide on their own and do it their own way. He's in high school now, so he should be able to be responsible. I think that's one we hear quite a bit when people are really hoping people students with brain injuries will grow up quicker than maybe they're able to without support, and it puts kids in really challenging situations. If she can't control her behavior, she can't be in my class. So this is a teacher often who has very high standards, doesn't accept a lot of behavior that's different, and this may be, a kid who really doesn't have much self-management skills and really can't help it, but and may be smart, may be quite capable, and be able to handle a lot of other aspects of classroom demands. And then here's another one. She can't have a behavior plan because her behaviors are attention seeking. So it's kind of like, well, she's just doing this to get attention. She doesn't deserve to have a plan to manage her behaviors. And I'll show you a little bit later that a lot of behaviors are assumed to be attention seeking even when they aren't, as if we actually look into the situation. So on the next list, we're down to number 5. If his parents would just teach him how to behave at home, we wouldn't have any problems at school. And I think there's some truth to that, because in all settings, it's better if everybody, all the adults in a child's world, are together in how to manage problems. But there's still things that can be done at school, even if problems at home are common. Here's another one. If she can't show respect for her teacher, she doesn't deserve my help. That's an expansion on the high standards kind of situation. In this case, it's, a certain amount of social responsibilities required of everybody. Helping him would take too much time away from helping the other kids. And there's truth to all of these. This one, certainly, if that's all you're doing, that's true. But if you can make some accommodations that reduce the time that's needed to provide special support to a child with a TBI, it can really make a big difference for that kid and for your classroom. Number 2 on our list is we need to let her experience the natural consequences of her behavior. Well, that works pretty well in kids who are able to learn from experience and don't have a lot of executive self-awareness, self-control problems. But for a lot of kids after significant brain injuries, that can be not a natural activity to be able to appreciate the natural consequences of the behavior. And our number 1 reason not to do anything is he has a brain injury, so he can't learn to control his behavior. And that's sometimes we make the case with parents and school staff, don't be too hard on this kid because a lot of these things are not under their good control. But that doesn't mean we don't try to improve behavior. So it's not hopeless. It's not like the principles of behavior management are totally unworkable with kids with brain injury. You just need to approach it in slightly different ways. So this is what I think can be very helpful in the alternative approaches, is trying to figure out what the function of behavior, not what the behavior itself is. But so here's a kid in our little photo here who's getting out of the window, and we don't know why they're getting out of the window. We don't know what they are trying to tell us. I mean, they're probably not trying to tell anybody anything at that moment because they're being secretive to sneak away. But we don't know if this is something where they're doing to get attention because they get a big reaction when they sneak out of the house, or if they're trying to get something tangible or preferred activity, so they're going to go play ball with friends even though they've been told they got to clean up their room, or if they're just avoiding a task or escaping from an overwhelming situation. So, things are really bad between other family members. They're getting out of there. They've been given a task that's overwhelming for them, so they're avoiding it. And these are all what those of us who deal with the world of functional and behavioral analysis look at. We can look at a number of functions that are social functions. They're social reasons we do stuff. And so we might do it to get attention, we might do it to get something tangible, or we might do it to escape what we don't want to do or can't do very well. And I think it's important for kids who've had brain injuries to figure out why they're doing something, not just what the behavior looks like. So thinking about those potential social functions, either attention or tangible or escape, is really a big deal, and I think can make a big difference in how you approach these kinds of behaviors. So part of that whole picture is also thinking about a model of behavior that looks at three main components, and there are lots of people who talk about this ABC model. So I thought I should at least get you thinking about it. What we're talking about here in terms of antecedents those are the events, the actions, the conditions, and the environments that precede the behavior. Setting those up so kids can succeed is really key to developing appropriate behavior for kids who've had a TBI. B, that middle section, is really the behavior itself. You know, what happened, what was observable, what could we measure, and it's important to link whatever we see in a child's behavior with what we know about the child's underlying deficits in cognitive functioning or in executive functions, because those can tell us a lot about what behavior we're seeing. And then the consequences, the rewards or the punishments that occur after that behavior occurs, and those can also help us to both understand and manage behavior, although we do find that a lot of kids with brain injuries are not as responsive to consequences as some kids who haven't had a TBI. So that's just something, keep that in mind as we continue on here. Here's some things just to be thinking about with this whole ABC model as well. There are also strategies or techniques that may have worked before the child had a TBI that may not be as effective after the TBI. And so, as I was mentioning, you can't rely just solely on rewards, on the contingency management. So a student may be impulsive, fail to connect the actions with the consequences. They may fail to remember information about what just happened, and they may fail to generalize. And so those are all things that get in the way of just learning in a straightforward way from whatever the consequences or rewards of an action are. The child may also have difficulty thinking about alternatives, so they don't know what else to do, or they may have such a history of failure, frustration, and non-complying and being oppositional that may reduce the effectiveness of any of the consequence-based interventions. And we got to remember that for a lot of these kids, new learning is difficult. So that applies also to learning behaviors, not just what you're reading from a book. And when we think about kind of the continuum that we want to look at for kids who've had a brain injury, going from a degree of control that's more external, this is guidance or control from the outside, adults in the world structuring things, cueing kids, even providing medication to help manage behavior. And at the other end is more internal. This is what we would like to think a fully functioning adult can do. They can self-regulate. They can manage their own behavior, and they don't need too many cues from the environment or too much structure to do that. And so we try to move students as quickly as possible in the direction of more internal control. But we have to provide enough guidance and structure and external control so the kids don't fail too quickly as they're moving toward more internal controls. So this is why we all often talk about focusing on those, setting up the conditions, the focus on antecedents. These are external factors, and we can often alter the environment much more efficiently than we can alter the child, at least immediately. And that removes a burden for decision making from the child. So the adults in the child's world can become the control center, the frontal lobes, the boss in this case with Springsteen over there, of the child's functioning. And you can do it in a way that's really setting up the child for success, which is ultimately what we're trying to do. And those antecedents also set the stage for what comes next. And it works well with students with BI because it looks ahead and is proactive. It helps the student learn adaptive skills. It replaces disruptive behavior with positive behaviors, and it can produce some long-term changes. So if we think about what kinds of adaptations may follow from that in the classroom, there can be a lot of structure support in the classroom itself by the teacher and the physical environment. They can, limit variables that contribute to behavior problems, so kids aren't put in situations that lead to behavior problems. They can limit overly complex or distracting stimulation, so noise or lots of activity, loudness of the other students, or things happening throughout the school. And they can control the social situations in which the child is put in this classroom setting. For individuals, and I'm going to talk about a guy that we're calling Buddy here. That's not his real name, but just some things. Buddy will come up in the next couple of slides as well. But you can focus on the individual child and what they need, so you can provide more supervision for the child. More visual cues, schedules, and routines are really important. Physical prompts may be needed if they're not listening very closely or not remembering well. Teaching the behaviors in the context of everyday activities and building up everyday routines is really important, because once you make this more automatic, then it doesn't require as much self-regulation. And modeling by the teachers, so the teacher is actually showing the child what to do, not just telling them. And you can make physical arrangements more conducive to learning, organizing the space and preferential seating and arrangement of the classroom, those kinds of things. You can also use language in ways that are simpler for the child. So language can be simple and clear and concise and concrete and really specific, and stay positive and be slow enough paced that the child can keep up. And you can also change how you present tasks. So these are all setting up the antecedent conditions so the child is going to have an easier time learning and not be as likely to start showing some behavior problems. So you can make tasks shorter, you can build in breaks, you can have cues about when things start or when they're done, put them in steps, you can build in choices, and you can make the task more visually appealing and more fun to do, and that can keep interest and the child sustaining focus for longer periods of time. But the thing to really remember is that behavior and cognition are linked. They're not totally separate, and they're often inseparable and interlocked after a brain injury, especially issues of cognitive problems and executive deficits. And the behavioral intervention does require attention to the cognitive supports, and that's why this whole issue of antecedent behaviors, antecedent conditions, and setting them up is so important. And we often call this scaffolding, and this is some terminology that Tim Feeney and Mark Ilvasucker have used over the years, and I think is a really useful way to think about these kinds of problems. So there's scaffolding for the brain. It looks like some buildings I've seen when I've traveled in Italy, but it really is a matter of providing the external structure for those kids who really aren't able to do the internal self-control sufficiently well. So that comes in terms of structure of the activity, the routine, prompting, redirection when needed, refocusing when needed, and providing scripts that can be kind of learned and practiced to become automatic and become part of those routines. And part of that too is just building in the momentum, the behavioral success, really focusing on positive and successful behaviors, then generates more positive and successful behaviors. And those kind of realistic expectations are really critical, based on the child's strengths, what we know about their cognitive skills, how they can learn, what their executive functions are in terms of both strengths and weaknesses. If we can look at those and set up situations we know they can succeed at, then they will get in the mindset that they can approach even more challenging tasks with the chance of success. And then they won't have behavior problems just acting up to escape a task that they really see as impossible. And that's why Ilvasucker and Feeney talk so much about positive everyday routines. And I've included references to a couple of their books that are particularly good at talking about this issue. That you know, when you do interventions within everyday life activities and make them functional and really within context, then they can become a routine. And a routine is a behavior chain in which each link is a cue for the next link. And it's also a reinforcer for the previous link. So it just kind of keeps going. Once you build these up, you build these patterns of behavior up, then you don't have to continually remind the child to do it a particular way because they've built up this routine. And this is the best way to learn a lot of the things in terms of, you know, positive, everyday, real world behaviors in kids with brain injuries. And once those are established, those routines can guide behavior in the absence of any need for explicit reinforcement of any specific behavior in the chain. So you just need to keep the routines positive, relatively easy to accomplish, again, so you get success, and generally associated with satisfying experiences. And then those routines become used and become ways that kids can guide their own behavior when tasks come up that are maybe more challenging. And these work really well with kids with TBI. This is our friend Buddy again. And so we should be thinking about how can this approach, looking at the kids functioning, what we need to figure out about the behavior we're seeing in the classroom, we can pull together some of what we've learned about scaffolding and about functional analysis, and that I think can help think through kids like Buddy. Buddy's, you know, this is a little preschool kid who threatened to kill a teacher and so was suspended for that. Well, do we really think he was going to kill a teacher? Because they had no other indications that he was. But they didn't really think about what the behavior may be cueing. So, you know, when you think about that, one of the things that we figured out with Buddy is he probably wasn't trying to kill the teacher, but the teacher also saw him as doing this in an attention-seeking way, which it may not have been, and it may instead have been to escape some task demands he couldn't handle, or he didn't have enough scaffolding to be able to handle those tasks, rather than we think of so many things as just attention-seeking when they're not always. And we can, for somebody like Buddy, we can use communication as an alternative to inappropriate behavior. So you can teach Buddy to ask for help with something, or help him get started on a task, instead of him threatening to kill the teacher and then being able to escape the task. So that's one of those situations where, you know, you don't use timeout, you don't use that approach when the behavior is motivated by escape from something that is a non-preferred activity, and that's really what Buddy was doing. The other thing that can be really helpful for a guy like Buddy is giving choices that are simple and specific, so you don't get into a confrontational mode. The kid has to do some work before they go from math class, which they don't like, to music class, which they do like. But you say, okay, do you want to do 3 problems or 5 problems before you go to music? And that's much better than making a more general question that he has time to think and sort of create some difficult situation that the teacher wishes he hadn't just created, and now he's being sent out of the room or to the back of the class again. But he's able to work in these kind of situations. So if you can keep things simple and specific, that can be helpful as well. Now, the AEAs throughout Iowa have a lot of staff who, well, I shouldn't say a lot because some of these teams are fairly limited, but they have staff who are there to support kids who have difficulties, either challenging behavior or problems related to brain injuries. And both the challenging behavior and brain injury resource teams have expertise that can help kids who've had a brain injury and show challenging behaviors. And sometimes the same staff overlap with these teams, but it's good to get them involved if you're really struggling with kids in school settings and nothing else is working. And as I mentioned, functional analysis is compatible with treating students with brain injury. In fact, there's an appendix in in one of Ylvisaker and Feeney's books that specifically focuses on using basically functional communication training, using communication that's appropriate to replace behavior that's inappropriate, and the same strategies we've just been talking about today. So that's one of the resources I'll show you in a second here. So the things to remember are that fluctuations in behavior are expected after brain injury, so that's not something that is unusual, that is weird or anything. Brain injury also means it's more difficult to stop misbehaving and to learn acceptable behavior, because learning new behavior is less efficient if you sustained a significant brain injury. And so changes following TBI will vary greatly from student to student, so no two will be alike, so that makes it a little more challenging. But they're also, even though they can be treated and improved, they do often stick around for a while in some form. So we do need to continue to try to work on these. We can't just assume they're going to magically disappear if we wait long enough, because that doesn't always happen. And negative consequences may not be seen immediately, but only emerge when the developmental demands reveal deficits and problems. So you can see adolescents who were doing okay in primary elementary school levels, and now they're struggling because the social and academic demands are so much greater. And so the needs for intervention are greater as well. So here's the take-home messages that I want to leave you with. It's really important to use strengths. You look at how the child's put together neuropsychologically, use that information to figure out how to set up the conditions where they'll succeed. And if you can build up routines in the real world, as Ylvisaker and Feeney focus on, those natural settings and the activities are the best context for any kind of intervention. They may have more trouble with typical school learning, but if you can build up those routines, even those issues can be lessened as problems. You got to focus on antecedent conditions, set up a successful learning environment. That's really important. Use scaffolding, use those external supports until you can build the ability to use internal controls. Look at the social functions of behavior. Expect to see a lot of problems with escape if the scaffolding is not sufficient. So it may be a sign that you just need to do more scaffolding if you're seeing a lot of escape-motivated behaviors in a child who's not doing well academically or behaviorally. And expect changes. A student with a BI is changing and often inconsistent, so don't be surprised by that. Don't be discouraged by that. And you got to work with a team. You got to collaborate among teachers and families and the students themselves, and figure out what is going on and what to do about it. And that's going to be an individualized approach. So here are a couple of the resources I had mentioned, actually 3 on this page, but the green book, the Collaborative Brain Injury Intervention book by Ylvisaker and Feeney, is a great reference. And Appendix B has a really nice brief summary of the functional communication training approaches that I mentioned that requires some degree of a functional behavioral analysis. There's the Brain Injury Quick Guide, which is available on the Alliance website, and I think on the Department of Public Health website as well. And there's another Ylvisaker and Feeney book that is there on traumatic brain injury rehab. And then one more set of things. There's some, just a simple 2-page form that is designed to work with kids with moderate to severe TBI and just kind of cover the range of things that come up in kids who have these kinds of problems. It's not just focused on behavior, it's focused on a lot of other things, but it's just a simple resource and gets you thinking about what you might pay attention to. And then the Project LearnNet website is a nice resource for strategies and scripts and things to help you work with kids who are struggling with behavior and with other things as well. And that's all I wanted to get across today, but be glad to answer any questions, and appreciate your patience in listening and watching today.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Scott. Such valuable information. We have had one question so far come up, is coming from someone who's curious if you're able to share your slides with the attendees. Just a reminder to all the attendees, we did record this event, and it will be available in our archived webinars on our YouTube page. If you're specifically interested in the slides themselves, I guess, Scott, that would be up to you if you'd be willing to share.
Sure, I would.
Yeah, a protected version of your content writing, so we could share that then. That would be great.
So should I just share it with you then?
Yeah, I would say just send me maybe a PDF version of it, or I can, if you want to send me the PowerPoint, I can change it to a PDF version and then send out that document to folks as well.
Okay, I should be able to do that later today.
Great. And I know that he mentioned, just to the attendees, he mentioned the blue pediatric flip book, and for those of you that are
quick guide.
The quick guide, thank you.
Yeah.
For those of you that are unfamiliar with that, like he said, we have copies of that here. There's an electronic version that lives on the Department of Public Health website as well. But any questions about getting access to that simple quick guide, we can certainly answer those questions. Just call us or email us. So other questions that people might have? I'm not seeing any right now. So I guess if individuals have additional follow-up questions, don't hesitate to maybe forward those to me, and we can try to get some answers for you. So thanks again to everyone who joined us today, and you'll be getting a link for asking for your participation in a feedback survey. And we'd love to hear your thoughts on the session. And then you'll also get a copy of a participation certificate for any CEUs that you want to attempt to get, but we're not able to provide CEUs for this. So you'll be getting a certificate. And any other questions that you might have, feel free to give us a call. Thank you so much.